Hi students, it's Mrs. T, and I am here to talk to you about development. It is the 10th chapter in the 12th edition, maybe 9th in the 11th edition. Anyway, whatever edition you're using, 10th, 11th, or 12th, please look in the table of contents. We are in the development chapter. We've already touched on this in previous weeks when we were talking about push and pull factors for migration. So you've already got some of this in your mind, and you have heard about the topic Human Development Index and the issues like healthcare and education level and life expectancy, among others, that are factors to calculate the Human Development Index. Well, development, which is the topic of chapter 10, is the concept that we use to classify, and it is becoming a more outdated concept that we use to classify nations in comparison to each other in the first world, second world, and third world, like we learned in previous lessons. But development is still, because it has economic factors and because it has industrialization at the core and urbanization as a characteristic, development is still a very strong measurement factor for the style of life that a population within a country enjoys. So in this next few series of lessons, ones that I make for you and ones that I curate for you on the development topic, we're going to look at the economic factors and how countries are compared to each other based on these economic factors, but also look at some countries. Bhutan is the country I'm thinking of. We will look at that in a separate video because they have come up with, the population of Bhutan that is, has come up with a different kind of measurement to use to compare their country with the rest of the world. So let's look at some abbreviations first. I say abbreviations, they certainly are. You can look at this GNP, GDP, and GNI. These are the things that we're going to be referring to a lot in this chapter, and in your reading, you will notice them a lot. They're introduced at the beginning of the chapter. So, okay, so levels of development. This is really a way that we compare trackable economic exchanges within and without a country. Internally and externally is what I mean. So if a government can track an economic exchange through taxes or tariffs or duties, interest payments, anything like this, then those are the economic measures that are used to calculate these three different things that I just listed for you. So GNP stands for gross national product. And this is the total value of goods and services that are produced by residents of the country. Now, it's not limited to producing them within a country. So, for instance, if you are a resident or a citizen of the United States, but you have a factory in Canada or something, and you are producing goods there, then that would be considered part of our gross national product. So it's just by the citizens of the country, the goods and services is a very general area, from cyber security all the way down to manicures and pedicures, and anything in between can be considered a service. And goods, of course, or raw materials, even if you're mining for earth minerals, goods and raw materials can be produced by a company that is headquartered in some place. Maybe Switzerland is where the company operates, but the mine might be in Ghana in Africa or something, right? So that would be considered part of the gross national product of Switzerland, if that's where the corporation is housed. Corporations are considered people in this calculation scheme. Okay, so another thing that is used to calculate or to compare countries of the world, one of the basic factors is gross domestic product. Now this is just looks at the goods and services that are produced within the country. When you see the word domestic, it's talking about home life. And so gross domestic product means you are within the country's territory every year. So it doesn't specify that people who have to be residents there, or the people who own the factory don't have to be residents or citizens of that country. It's just what is produced within that country. So it's not necessarily a good measurement of how much benefit the people of the country actually get from that. Certainly, if there is a company that is mining for oil and trucks and transportation and refineries and things like that, that the country does have control of or own, people within that country has control of or own. So certainly there can be economic benefit from that kind of activity that is included here in the gross domestic product that would bolster the lifestyle of the people in that country. But it would include, of course, money that benefits some other country's bottom line. And that's where this next factor comes in, the gross national income. So here you take essentially the GDP, how much is produced inside that country's territory per year, and you add to it income from other investments that come from outside the country. So does a country have a share in some kind of mine outside its geopolitical territory? Or does a country have control over or offer investments and loans to other countries, such as China is a major world player at the moment because it's probably not going away at the moment because they have extended lines of credit. They have extended loans to so many different high income nations in the world that now those nations owe China huge interest payments and then also principal payments to pay down that debt. And so so that's income that comes from other countries that goes into China, for instance. So you take the gross domestic product, you add the income from investments that are outside that country, and then you subtract any payments that that country might owe to outside individuals or outside companies or outside countries, lending institutions or something like that. So this gross national income is really a better measurement, or it gives us more variables in one number that we can look at and compare countries in the world. So if you look at the gross national income for countries and you divide that amount, that total amount for a year, you divide that amount by the number of people in the population, you come up with something called a per capita or per person gross national income. And that per capita gross national income, when it's really, really high, when you calculate it for a country, say Japan, for instance, is mentioned in the textbook, you have a really high per capita GNI. That means that the style of life, the standard of living, the degree of urbanization, the degree of industrialization, these concepts that are typed down here, these things are very, very high. The people there tend to enjoy a very high standard of living, have high incomes themselves. Infrastructure, like we saw in one of the videos that we watched recently, infrastructure is usually well in place. It's updated, it's maintained. You have all kinds of services in the electrical grid. You have widespread availability of digital services and banking and all kinds of utilities. You don't have to worry about sanitation or clean water and those kinds of things like we saw in a previous lesson that we've had together. So these high numbers of per capita GNI tell us a lot about the boots on the ground, the lifestyle of the people who live there. If you have a very, very low per capita GNI, it tells us, again, the same thing a lot about the style of life of people who live there. And here's where we get the difference between a first world country and a third world country. The style of life in these two places, vastly different. We will be looking at that in some lessons to come. So the lower the per capita GNI number is, after you take the gross national income and you divide it by the number of people in the population, if it comes out to be a very low number, that means that there are not a lot of resources available, not affordable resources for people who live there, maybe not urbanization. There's maybe cities are makeshift or even slums. This is a technical term that the UN uses to talk about the lack of urbanization and resources that are are available in an area. And these things greatly affect the Human Development Index that we have learned about in previous lectures. So remember, your Human Development Index has all kinds of factors associated with it. Education level is one of them, or access to jobs is one of them. Access to healthcare and disease maintenance, at least, is one of them. Well, if these resources are not available in an area because a lack of industrialization or a lack of urbanization, then your standard of living is very, very poor. Maybe the water supply that is common or is readily available in your area, like that water problem that we saw they had and sanitation problem we saw they had in that Brazilian village that we saw in a previous lesson. These kinds of things can shorten your lifespan. And if you have these hurdles to overcome just in your daily trying to survive kind of daily life, then you don't often have enough time or energy or health to pursue things like a higher educational attainment, so that you have greater access to jobs that might be available, or you can make better decisions for the health and safety of your family, or for family planning in general. You'll have more knowledge about how to do that. So these are the concepts that we look at in development, and they're really important for looking at the style of life. It seems kind of dry, I guess, or humanless to look at just these numbers or these abbreviations that you plug numbers into. It seems a little dry, and it lacks the human element to a certain extent. But please understand that these concepts, when you read between the lines and become more educated about them, gives a lot of information about the standard of living, the expectations for daily life, like the electrical grid or the internet, like you're using both of which you're using right now just to go to school. The fact that you have this school available to go to because you don't have to worry about walking miles to fetch water from a clean water supply, or collecting it from a dirty one and cleansing it yourself so that you have water to bathe with and brush your teeth with and wash your hair and cook with and drink and these kinds of things. So it takes a lot of time to do all these things yourself in a country that we call a third world country. There's my air quotes, because remember, these are concepts that are in our minds that our other textbooks, like our history textbooks or our political science textbooks, use these phrases. Journalism uses it. You hear it on the news all the time. But in geography, in anthropology, in sociology, in classes like this where we look at the human factor, we tend to make it more about this gross national income, the per capita gross national income, because it tells us a lot. When it's a really, really low number, it tells us that there is not a lot of development in that area. And not a lot of development means not a lot of industrialization. And that means the infrastructure, like roads, just basic roads, but definitely not sanitation systems or clean water resources or trash pickup, maybe not a reliable electrical grid or natural gas of some sort as a power supply. These things aren't readily available. And let me just tell you, your life is much harder if these things are not available. So, and it's not just harder for a day or an afternoon when the electricity happens to be knocked out from a thunderstorm. It's bad from a perpetual constant, that is, constant deprivation. You are deprived of those really life-changing resources, just basic electricity. Just basically the electrical grid, or a refrigerator to store food so it doesn't spoil, or a place to buy it, and the industrialized food supply that has all the preservatives in it so that it lasts a couple of days, and these kinds of things, which we will talk about that industrialized food supply in lessons in the future. But for now, this is a good introductory discussion of what development is all about. You'll see in another lesson, you will see some development theories that are common in geography over the last decades, to look at how we can perhaps bring more countries up. I say we, that sounds very paternalistic. Well, we can bring more folks into a higher standard of living over time. So I'll see you in the next video and we'll learn about that. Bye.